Know the difference with Annex Wealth Management. A while back, our next team member was on one of our radio shows, and we discovered she was not a millennial, as we assumed, but she was indeed living and breathing member of Gen Z, Generation Z. Let's welcome back Jenny Jesse, financial planning specialist and a CFP at Annex Wealth Management. Hey, Jenny.
Hi, Danny.
So is it good or bad that you are what would be considered an old Gen Zer?
Well, since I'm right at the beginning of the cutoff to be considered a Gen Z, I feel like I'm sort of a mix between a millennial and a Gen Z. I definitely grew up surrounded by technology, which is one thing that definitely sets Gen Z apart from earlier generations. But since I'm an older member of Gen Z, I'm somewhat out of touch with what the kids are saying nowadays.
Are you really? Well,
yeah.
Welcome. This is how it starts. Help my boomer brain out. Gen Z is defined how?
Generally, someone is Generation Z if they were born between the late 1990s and the early 2010s. So those are people that are currently about 10 to 25 years old.
I spotted an article about Gen Z, and the opening sentence was kind of grim. For Gen Z, it's daunting to think about saving, investing, and planning for retirement. Jenny, is it daunting?
I've always been interested in personal finance, and I actually got my degree in personal finance, so to me, financial planning is second nature. But for my friends who aren't in the financial sector, they have described it as daunting and confusing. A common attitude of younger people seems to be they want to spend their money now, and they'll figure that all out later.
No, so here's what you faced. Is you started your career, the stock and bond markets have been in turmoil, a lot of talk about recession, wages not keeping up with inflation, credit card debt interest rates are rising, housing costs have surged, and a massive retirement savings shortfall has gotten worse. Makes you want to go back to school, doesn't it?
There certainly have been a number of major economic events since I started my career, which can definitely seem intimidating. But I like to focus on the big picture and look at things over the long run. It's easy to get caught up in what's happening now, but I do think it's important to plan for the future. Your future self will be glad you did.
Even for Gen Z, it's not a bad idea to do a financial health checkup. You sketch out that roadmap. It balances immediate money goals. You're maybe saving for retirement, even if it's decades away. I'll tell you this, we should all be doing it. My generation is no better. That seemed far in the future. So for many listening now, the future is now, but not for you. There are 5 things that people say young people should do to get their finances in order. Let's see if you agree. And the first is to pay down debt.
Yeah, many young people have debt from student loans or credit cards, and another popular option that's a bit newer to the scene is buy now, pay later. However, it's easy to get wrapped up in this and accrue large balances that are difficult to pay off. It's important to look at the interest rates and fees associated with your debt to really understand what the cost of that money is. A common rule of thumb is to pay down your highest interest rate debt first, as that is the most costly. And it's also important to keep current with your payments to build up your credit score for those bigger purchases later in life, like buying a home.
Yeah. How about diversification?
As the old saying goes, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Having a diversified portfolio helps balance out the risk of your investments. It's a good idea to invest across different sectors and asset classes. Many young people are intrigued by cryptocurrency, which, as we've seen over the past year, can be very volatile.
Yeah, a little.
And it's important to determine your risk tolerance. This is the amount of risk you're comfortable with, but another important factor is your risk capacity. This is the amount of risk your portfolio can afford to take on. For example, someone who's closer to retirement may have a lower risk capacity because they're going to need to start drawing from those savings soon, whereas a member of Generation Z has a higher capacity for risk since retirement is decades into the future. Us younger folks can sustain the volatility of the market since we won't be touching those retirement funds for many years.
We're with Jenny Jesse, a financial planning specialist and a CFP at Annex Wealth Management, part of Generation Z, and we're going over a list of suggestions to implement. They really make sense for all of us. How about emergency savings?
It's typically recommended that people have 3 to 6 months worth of their living expenses stashed aside in an emergency savings account. Having an emergency savings can help keep you out of debt down the road. It might seem more important to pay off your student loans first before starting to build up a savings account, but when an unexpected expense arises and there's no emergency fund to pull from, you may be forced to take on high interest debt to cover that expense. So having an emergency savings can help keep your financial plan on track.
Hey, what do you think about this? The suggestion you should have a personal balance sheet. What is that?
I think that's a great way to truly understand what you own and what you owe. So a balance sheet is going to show all of your assets versus any liabilities. And I personally update my own balance sheet each January so I can get a gauge of what my assets look like compared to liabilities. Having this holistic view of your finances allows you to make a plan to increase your assets by saving more and decrease any liabilities by paying them off over time. This goes hand in hand with having a budget to understand what your income versus expenses are.
You've got a great plan. I think you're atypical, though, right? I mean, don't you think?
Right. I am a little bit of a nerd, not your typical Gen Z. Just most people my age aren't thinking about finances the way I am.
You're going to thank yourself down the road. And the final suggestion, I know it seems so far away, plan for retirement.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's psychological nature to think about what you want in the current moment, and it's more difficult to think about your future self. But young people have time on their side, allowing for years and years of growth in their investment accounts. This is why it's so important to start saving as soon as you can, even if it's just a little bit. Another common rule of thumb is to save 10 to 15% of pay to get yourself on track for retirement. However, young people may be balancing debt payments with saving for retirement, so that isn't always possible for everyone. If your employer-sponsored retirement plan offers a matching contribution, it's great to take full advantage of that if you can afford to do so. Receiving that employer match is essentially free money towards your retirement savings.
You know, everything we've talked about is stuff that every single generation should have been doing or needs to be doing.
Right. Yeah, I would say this is really prudent advice for anyone.